Hey everybody, welcome, welcome. Oh, Grace, hey, hey. Fun people I already know. And Michaela. I don't know Jeffrey. Sorry about that. We're just letting a few more folks in and then we'll get started. Cool. Yeah, why don't we'll start chatting and then more people come in when they come in. Um, hey everybody. Uh, we wanted to talk a bit about living abroad post Kenyon, what that life's about. Um, I'll introduce myself. Uh, I'm Aaron Lynn, class of 2014. I'm an actor and also piecing together whatever means of money from admin jobs, receptionist stuff to copywriting jobs. I work for Oatly is one of my big copywriting jobs right now. That's been fun. But one of my first gigs, I now live in London, so that's my abroad place to be. Um, one of my first money making jobs when moving to London was through a Kenyon alum who set me up with a children's book editing company. So I did some copy editing, copywriting for them, which is a lot of fun. And I made a last minute trip visiting a friend in Belfast. So I'm in Northern Ireland right now. Um, but we'll talk about traveling later at some point. So, hey, that's me.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and introduce myself too. Hi, everyone. My name is Jodi-Ann. Quite a few people that I already know in the call, so nice to see everyone. I'm class of 2020, and at Kenyon, I majored in international studies. And currently, I am working also in London, United Kingdom, in climate policy and finance. And I'll save the story of how I got here later, but I'm also like Aaron, not in London currently, as I'm taking my time off from work in Cyprus. Again, we can talk about traveling later, but feel free to ask any questions. I'm here to kind of share my experience and share any insights that might be useful for everyone here. Yeah.
I thought a good little way to start might be we were just talking, Jodi-Ann and I were talking about some culture shock episodes when first moving to a new place. Um, and I don't necessarily have specific stories, but I remember multiple times, especially this is perhaps a UK specific culture shock thing, but making sure you look to the right first when crossing a street. Um, is a thing I'm still getting used to, even though the UK is pretty good about writing on the pavement below you. Look right or look left, depending on where you're crossing. But still, old habits die hard. Um, Jodi-Ann, do you have any specific culture shock events?
Um, I think, yeah, I guess I can picking up from that. I still kind of, luckily on the streets of London, sometimes you look down on the street and it tells you like look left or look right. And I think that's a pretty easy way of making sure everybody's in the same line there. But a lot of bikers, I think the way of communication, the way of approaching kind of day to day, especially in the workplace, is quite different, as I understand in Europe, but specifically in London. As I'm speaking here, I was just saying how I'm currently off from work for 2 weeks, and this kind of approach and this encouragement of taking just a big chunk of time off and all the days that you're allotted, any days that you deserve within your kind of contract, take all of it, don't hold back. There's no kind of toxic positivity and overworking yourself or staying on for extra 30 minutes after work. That's something that I think I slowly had to adapt to, and also because my parents are immigrants, so I think I grew up kind of having this hardwired, like hardworking mentality in my head, and that's something that I have to kind of, I'm slowly unlearning. But I think it's a great way of, if we're talking about labor relations or work-life balance or whatever that is. So that's something that kind of shocked me, but it's I would say a good shock.
Yeah, always good to have a positive shock when moving to a new place.
Yeah, exactly. Um, but yeah, I guess everyone here is interested in working abroad. So if anyone has any question to get it started or just right off the bat, feel free to just unmute and ask or pop them in the chat.
Agreed. But we'll also keep chatting until we see questions. Like on the side of positive shocks, hey, living in Denmark, amazing. On the side, talking about positive things, what do you think, Jodi-Ann, has been, besides, I guess, positive work-life balance, has been some of the most exciting aspects of living abroad for you?
Yeah. I think for me, so the backstory of how I ended up in London was that after I graduated from Kenyon, I did my master's in the UK. And so I studied a more refined kind of topic of what I was studying, international studies. So I did international development specifically, and I did that at Cambridge. So I graduated last July 2021. And after that, I stayed in London to work, because also in the UK, if you get a master's degree or higher here, they offer you a 2-year visa to stay without needing like work sponsorship and whatnot, which is, I think, a good way to keep people here after they've finished their degrees. But so the positive shock, I think, for me in that whole experience leading up to now working, is kind of the exposure to different theories of thinking, ideologies, opportunities than would be different from in the United States, especially when you're kind of studying something like politics, for example. Of course, the historical legacy of the United States and the UK kind of warrants different approach now to international relations, to say the least, and having an exposure to a different kind of thinking that's more multifaceted, but with a different historical legacy and baggage. It's something that I think has been really rewarding. And frankly, I mean, obviously after Brexit, but being close to other European countries and the home of many international organizations for me has offered good opportunities in terms of going to kind of events, work trips, like, for example, I got to go to the UN Climate Summit last year as part of a delegation. And I think that was really cool because, I mean, obviously it was in Glasgow, but we still get to, have close ties with the UN organizations because Geneva is not super far away to London. So that aspect of kind of working abroad or working in the UK specifically has been quite fulfilling.
Amazing. And Jeffrey, if you wanted to speak at all, please feel free. I'd love to hear what's interesting for me about Denmark as opposed to the UK is the different language, and whether that has been a barrier for you, whether you knew Danish ahead of time. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm kind of crashing the cool kids party here as class of 91, so sorry about this. Moving to Denmark was a big change. No, I did not know the language. No, I had not been here before. But I came to Denmark by way of Vienna, Austria. When I graduated from Kenyon in 91, I got my master's degree at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, and needed to do some work and I have a paid internship. So I moved to New Mexico and worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory as a writer, editor. And it was there that showed me kind of the international possibilities of work, because a lot of my colleagues were working with international organizations such as the International Atomic Energy Agency. And after about 6-7 years in Los Alamos, New Mexico, I applied for a job at the International Atomic Energy Agency. And a year and a half later, I was on a plane from Albuquerque to Vienna, Austria, having never been to Austria, not speaking German, and starting an international career. So you never know where that middle path is going to lead you. I had no plans in the world to work internationally, but it just kind of happened. And after 6-7 years in Vienna, working at a UN organization, talk about culture shock, nothing like a good old bureaucracy to educate you. Then I moved, I met my husband here well, we met in Vienna, and we moved to Denmark because he's Danish, because we could be married and have a life here in Denmark. And then I applied for a job as a writer-editor at the Technical University of Denmark, and I've been there ever since. And I think one of the things that, and I'm looking at all these names, I kind of wondered if we could do a poll, how many of you had spent a semester abroad at Kenyon that kind of gave you a little taste of life experience, influence, whatever it was being abroad. I was abroad and I was a physics major. And so yeah, I'm seeing hands go up, or maybe, and if you didn't, it's okay, you can still work abroad. That doesn't mean you can't. But there are certain experiences that, of course, Kenyon, going abroad, or just being stuck on the hill, making your own fun, can add to your life and your life experiences that make you very interesting to work abroad. And with that, I'll shut up and let others speak and ask questions.
Thanks for that, Jeffrey. Yeah, anybody else? Yeah, Nate, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, so I feel very young here. I'm still in college. I'm still at Kenyon. And I'm currently abroad for the year in Spain. So I've been here since August now, and it's been freaking awesome. I love being abroad. I'm also an international studies major. So this is like definitely in my lane. And actually I love being in Europe so much, and I have friends now here that I want to stay for the summer and look for jobs, possibly something remotely, just because it would be easier to take time and to travel. So I was wondering like what you guys would recommend, like what you guys, like I'm trying to work in, I would prefer something a little political maybe. But what do you kind of recommend, I guess?
I can jump in first, if that's all right. I actually did the same thing. So I studied abroad. I split my year, first semester in Ghana and then the second semester in China. And I stayed in China for the summer afterwards to intern there. And I found that internship just by way of meeting people at the university and going to career fairs there locally, and pretending like I'm a truly member of the university that I was studying at, and making connections here and there. I would say though, for internships, especially kind of connecting it back to wherever you want to go later on in terms of your career, or even back to your research for international studies, for example, I feel like I almost tripped over because I was so focused on getting the exact kind of experience that I wanted, that I overlooked other opportunities passing by because I felt like they didn't meet certain criteria. Whereas later on, I think the cliche is the experience, like however you make of it. But it's true that when I look back, the internships that I did, I drew kind of like a broad line of focus, and whether that's in topics or in skills that I gained or in different experiences, that I was able to kind of paint this full picture later on to kind of carve a narrative of what I did and why I did it and how it supports me to get to where I want to be later on. Again, I don't know the specifics of exactly what you're focusing on within international studies, but I think having first the opportunities and the ability to kind of just be there and look for opportunities, like if there is something that pops out that broadly aligns with what you want to do within that field of work, then I would just grab it, because at the end of the day, kind of interning in a different country under a different institution can be very rewarding, but also quite different at the same time. And I will just quickly add that I was also an international student at Kenyon. So for me, getting an internship in the US was more difficult. So I almost was forced to look abroad most of the time to get internships, because the immigration rules and visa complications were less.
Yeah, that's definitely something I've been thinking of, just the whole visa process, because I would have to theoretically, I guess, apply for an extension if I wanted to stay here. So I was actually thinking about maybe applying to companies back in the US, but I definitely I appreciate the career fair thing. I really do. Thank you.
And for me, I do have a remote job, but it's aligned with my interests, but not necessarily my career goals. Earlier I said I'm an actor is my main focus, but I cobbled together lots of different jobs. And I worked for the Kenyon Review as an intern when I was at Kenyon. So I had a lot of experience editing, reading, um, evaluating. And so one of my main sources of income right now is a copywriter, which I can do from anywhere, which is part of the reason I was like, yes, I will come to Belfast for 4 days because I can do it from anywhere. I got this job through a temp agency in London, and they've been really great. They find me all sorts of random jobs, some remote, some not. Um, and I think, as Jodi-Ann was also saying, there is value to doing something broadly within your interest and perhaps career path, but also maybe not even, it might not even necessarily look like it's part of what you want. I think that's also the value of a Kenyan education, is doing things that are sort of outside of your periphery is super valuable. And as far as visas and stuff go, I would love to talk more with people about their experience with getting visas and stuff. I am currently on an artist visa in the UK, and I just had to prove that I'd worked professionally in the US enough to warrant giving me an artist visa. But it allows me to do basically any sort of job, except for being a professional football player, which is kind of a bummer, but I guess that wasn't in the cards for me. And it gets me 5 years in the UK. So I'm sure there's several different visa options in many different countries, and I'm sure they're all very different. So if anybody would also like to speak about their experience with that, go for it. Or also, unless Jodi-Ann, you were going to say something.
No, I was just wondering, like everyone else who's here on the panel as well, like, are you interested in kind of just going straight into working abroad, or are you thinking about maybe like pursuing school first, like another degree in a different country, and then looking to work abroad? Like kind of like the path that I took, because, or like share what you studied and stuff. I think that way Aaron and I and everyone here can kind of exchange ideas and experiences as well. So feel free to pop it in the chat if you're comfortable.
I would also say I also did this sort of education thing. So I got a master's in London after having spent 5 years in New York. So I didn't do it right after Kenyon. But the advantage of getting your education, getting another degree abroad, if that's a possibility for you, is I do think it helped tremendously in getting a visa later, because I had a body of work already in the UK and connections. And as one of my favorite professors at Kenyon, Wendy Singer, always told me, going to grad school is really useful for networking. It's just who you meet, and the opportunities, as Jodi-Ann was saying, the opportunities to work at internships or other jobs elsewhere. Yeah.
Hey, everybody. My name is David Bowman. I'm class of 95. And I'm interested in your experiences because I've been overseas a number of times through government assignments. I'm in the Foreign Service, and the non-hand-holding expat package or diplomatic posting route is interesting to me for post-career and the experience of what's going on now. So my question would be, like, for someone like you, Aaron, or anyone else who's overseas figuring it out themselves, what about the support networks? Is the world of social media and easier connections changed that significantly? Because when I joined the Foreign Service, even in the early aughts, it was, you were introduced to expat groups because you needed friends in a sudden arrival in a foreign country, and they knew about where to go and how to meet new people better than you did at first. So I'm kind of interested in the other side of the coin, because my experiences have been really, distinct. If you're overseas, you probably have diplomatic friends who are, land in country or affluent expat packages and such. So anybody wanted to tell me how it goes nowadays, and how that kind of intro to boots on the ground has worked for you? I'm all ears. Thanks.
Yeah, I lots of thoughts about that. I do think social media has completely changed the game. Just being able to find other Kenyan folk straight on Facebook, Instagram, all those good things. But I will say the Kenyan Careers Network has also been a valuable tool for me. Um, I think they recently revamped the system, and so I would encourage everyone to check it out and maybe sign up again if you haven't already. I think I had to make a new profile from the older one that used to be on there, but the first, yeah, sort of money making job I had in London was through the Kenyan Careers Network. I saw somebody else was living in London, class of '07 maybe, and she put me in touch with her publishing company, which gave me a just short term copy editing gig. But that then helped me get this other copywriting thing. Um, so the Kenyan Careers Network has been great. Social media for sure. Jodi-Ann was talking about starting a UK contingent of Kenyan folks, which would be awesome. Um, yeah, knowing expats is super useful when it comes for me. I most of the time, if I'm hanging out with Americans, it's because I need something specific, like, oh, it's tax time. How do I not double pay my taxes? Because the UK, and I don't know if this is in other countries as well, the UK whatever tax year, is different than the US tax year. And so having to navigate the very specific expat stuff, I find really useful. It's good to have an American network, um, but also super useful to hang out with people who are not from the States.
Yeah, I think for me, the alumni connection has been huge. I think the first person that I spoke to when I was considering kind of the broad career path halfway through my master's is someone who is also on alumni council with me. And they had a stellar career in banking and finance and climate. And that was something that I was interested in. And, after a conversation from one person, it's like a web of people that they can introduce you to. So the Kenyan connection is a great place to start, I think, because there's always that sense of camaraderie that we went to the school together, no matter how many years apart, which has been great. And for me, I actually did a lot of networking through cold LinkedIn reach outs. I'm more prone to reach out to people who I've never met, but maybe have one or two mutual contacts and just be like asking the mutual contact if they can kind of set up a conversation together or just directly reach out. And I think 60% of the time they get back to you, at least say, or even they say they can't, I can't have a conversation with you. Sorry, like they let you know, they don't just kind of leave you there hanging, which has been quite helpful as well. And yeah, I think it's also just digging up old contacts at places that I want to be and just rekindling that connection years later, just giving it a try. I remember feeling very, very confused with where I wanted to be after my master's, because I could go to China, I could go to Canada, which is where my citizenship is, maybe go back to the US or stay in the UK, but where do I start? How do I compare these things? So I think I just did a round of outreach to people that I knew in these different countries working careers that are kind of similar to what I wanted to do. Just having a conversation, going through the logistics of things, which is quite helpful.
And what's also great about the Kenyan network is, as you were sort of saying, they can connect you with other people outside of the Kenyan network. So it leads to a much larger net than you might think originally. Um, Most of my connections have initially been Kenyan connections, but have led to a much larger net, which has been super useful. But yeah, as you were saying, there are like, and somebody posted, Olivia posted about an expat group on Facebook. Yeah, definitely. There are like American groups on Facebook in London or whatever, where you can ask specific. I think that's how I found some tax help, was through just a Facebook group. Um, social media is the is one great tool.
Yeah, and I think specifically for my organization, because actually, David, more particularly to your question, there are a lot of ex-diplomats or foreign service personnel who are now working at the organization that I'm working in, which is a UN initiative. And I found the trend of one person leaves their post and then 5 other follows. So I think from that, I kind of gathered that keeping up with old colleagues, at least in that instance, is quite helpful as well, because people kind of just moved in herds all to a new organization.
All
I
right.
don't know if anybody wants. Oh, go for it, Michaela.
Yeah, so Jodi-Ann, you sort of mentioned like better working conditions and being in Cyprus, which I'm very jealous about right now. And I was just sort of curious, like as like the US is like paying more attention to unions, like Kenyon is having conversations about unions. I was curious if you could expand more on like the benefits of like an international working environment, and like, is that one of the things that's kept you abroad, or like are there other things for everyone else who is outside the country as well that like have really sort of made you think more about it as a more permanent option? Or do you maybe view it as a more temporary sort of like part of your career path?
No, that's a great question. I think from the experiences that I've had so far, the approach to work culture, at least currently in the organization that I'm working in and kind of partner organizations, has been more positive. Like one of the better ones than that I've seen, 9 to 5 core hours or 10 to 4. Outside the core hours, you can structure it more flexibly. It's remote working. There's an office if you want to go into it. You have 2 months during the year where you can work abroad in another country remotely if you want to. And I think, and the workers are also kind of demanding fair kind of working conditions and equitable access and whatnot. And I think that conversation is kept more open, at least where I am currently working. Of course, I don't have that comparative case as in the US because I've never worked full time there. But so that's something that has, I think, been a plus for me. And also where I am working at currently is quite an international organization. We have, I think, offices in 7 other countries. So you also have this kind of global demand and setting the bar a bit higher and keeping the threshold higher, because you have to go for the highest possible like rules and of what the workplace should be like, as opposed to seeking the common denominator, because it has to work for everyone and to be more, to be more accessible in terms of getting resources and settling time zone differences and setting up meetings and maybe not having as many meetings because people might be outside their work hours in a different time zone and whatnot. So in that sense, it's kind of it's more attractive to me because these different kind of factors at play, and overall the conversation in general about fair practices in the workplace. But it's never perfect, gotta say that. So there's always room for improvement.
Adding on to that, I will say some of the benefits I experience are external from my career and job situation, because I don't have a full-time job per se right now. Most of my benefits are from the social structure of the United Kingdom itself. So like being able to, just pop over to the GP because I can and not have to worry about extra costs. Those sort of safety net benefits are massive for me from when I was living in New York and I was worried about going to the GP too much, or like having to get in an ambulance and paying for that. That's just like not a thing I have to worry about so much here. And also in terms of unions, so I'm part of the actors union in the UK. I'm also part of the union in the States. And in the States, the union is stronger and has higher wage caps. And so the UK union is not quite as strong, which is an interesting phenomenon. But because quality of life I have found is in some ways cheaper because of all the other things I don't have to pay for. Even if I'm not necessarily making as much on a big, like a West End show here doesn't pay as much as a Broadway show in New York. But because of the other factors, it ends up being okay-ish. I mean, for me personally, it's okay. But that is an interesting difference.
If I could just jump in here, I think one of the things, and my frame is Europe, is just the as we were saying, the medical issues and the union issues and everything. I think this is so much different as I got older, getting older. The conversations I was having with my fellow Kenyon graduates as they stayed in the US and were working and having families and developing their lives and stuff, the conversations were very different because I had national health care. I had public transportation available to me, not for free, but at a reduced rate. I had a union that backed me up and made sure I had the salary increases every year. And it's not to say one situation is better than the other, but it's very different and a very interesting observation that you can have this perspective to not even think about the healthcare issue, or if you do, it is such a low priority. You don't have to think about it so much, and that is quite different. Now, others who may have had experiences abroad outside of Europe or other areas may have something very different, what their concerns were, or how they felt the work-life balance came out in that situation. But to me, I really noticed a huge difference between my fellow graduates and friends in the US. Yeah, I kind of threw in there, Jodi-Ann, the whole thing about kind of mental health days. The sick leave, it's not a number of days, it's if you're sick, you're sick. I threw in there earlier parental leave. In Denmark, the maternity leave and the paternity leave, the mother can be basically off work almost a full year, paid, here in Denmark, and it's a shared amount of time with the father as well. So the father, you can negotiate how much time the father gets as well. So it's a very different situation in Europe, at least in Denmark. And that's something that you may want to really consider. What is important and what you want to do when you start into your career with that idea, I want to get to international work, to having experience abroad. What does that mean for me? If you want to start a family or just living abroad and having easy access to medical care.
Sorry, Aaron, go ahead. I just wanted to add also, I think in the US or in some of the countries, there's a huge difference between citizens and non-citizens in terms of working there and what you have access to. Whereas I think in other countries, particularly European countries, UK, for example, that difference is much smaller, sometimes not there. There is no difference and no discrimination, no matter what your status is, your immigration status is. And I think that's something that's quite important as well, looking at working abroad as a US citizen or whatever citizenship yours might reside in.
and this has been very evident. Talk about COVID, but like the fact that I can go to a pharmacy in the UK and pick up a box of 20 lateral flow antigen tests and not have to pay for it is incredible. When I was just visiting my folks in December in Ohio and having to pay $10 for one lateral flow test was just insane to me. I didn't fully realize until that moment how different, disparate responses across the world have been to healthcare.
I was curious if we had anybody on the call working outside of Europe. I know I saw someone mention being in Ecuador, and maybe someone else saying that they had worked in the UAE, just as like part of the experience of this conversation.
Yeah, I think maybe I can jump in. So I've worked in the UK, but also in the UAE and in Hong Kong. I think the rest of the panel has shared a lot of very useful stuff, but it's also quite hard to generalize because a lot of this varies from country to country. So for example, stuff about work environment and unions, it's definitely like that in the UK, but like now I work in a country that is more like the US in terms of terrible work environment and poor union density and all of these things. So yeah, I think definitely if you're considering going abroad somewhere, it will be good to talk to someone who has experience in that country because like you mentioned, the experiences could be very different depending on where you're going.
Yeah, I'll second that. Aaron or group, I've never worked in a developed country, and the topics of EU work are really cool to think like Jeff and Jodi-Ann and you are really cool. But I mean, just working in Mexico as an American, even a diplomatic American, was a world of difference. And you know, in places in former Soviet Union, I've worked in the stands a few times. Your experience as even a privileged American overseas with a different passport is wildly complicated and challenging. So for some of the other listeners out there, and the challenges are fun and growth experiences and career experiences, but it's not there's a lot of nations out there that aren't even not even nearly developed or highly developed as some of the ones we're hearing about right now. I could answer some of those questions. I was just overseas in Ukraine a couple of years ago, but and that was my nicest assignment. So yeah, it's exciting to want to be in Europe or East Asia, but there's other types of living situations out there. Over.
Hi, sorry I couldn't get on until now. Michaela, I did see your message from earlier. I could talk about a lot of things. I'm still pretty new here in Ecuador. I moved here in December. I had various types of careers over the past decade, which maybe sounds familiar to some of you. But I have been working as an animal behavior consultant for the past few years. And luckily that was really easy to transfer over, especially after COVID and everyone having experiences doing Zoom meetings. Zoom consults really became a thing in the animal behavior world. So it is a completely different culture here though, in terms of animal welfare. So I'm learning and doing at the same time. And for me, I can't necessarily speak to the wealth of other types of experiences of people maybe working for, say, a company in the US that has their headquarters here. That tends to happen here in Quito. I've noticed as I've networked with various people. I mainly network through my Facebook at expat groups. And honestly, I quite like Erin here. I am doing my behavior consulting work and building up my business here, slowly but surely, you know. But I'm also doing some teaching on the side, teaching English. And I'm also, I'm currently interviewing with a company that works in software development, as the job is for a project manager. So, you know, really, I've found that I network really well, and the purpose of that for me is not necessarily to have exactly the job I'm looking for, but to have not just a wealth of resources and a huge network, but to meet also clients and new friends. And I mean, it really just snowballs, you know, the more that you get, even just from an interview process, not even getting a job, right? So so yeah, I'm always very open-minded when it comes to what I'm looking out for, and it serves me really well. I never have a moment where I'm lacking, you know.
What other thoughts or questions are people feeling? I guess, are there other anxieties folks have about the plunge moving abroad, or when it comes to thinking about moving abroad? Like, things I was really worried about and I'm still kind of worried about is um, mostly sort of government stuff, taxes, visa situation. For me personally, funding for projects, if I want to do that, it can be a little tricky for me as an American actor, because while I am allowed to work in the UK, I can't technically use public funds or certain public funds because I'm not actually a British citizen. Um, so that's a thing I have to try to circumvent by maybe like starting a theater company. But yeah, does anybody else have any specific anxieties?
I think for me, it's always like feeling the need to plan ahead a bit more than I'm comfortable with, because when the visa runs out, or, you know, whatever happens next, where do I go next? I sometimes I feel like I've already taken the first leap at working somewhere outside of my home country. Then I might as well just keep doing that. But then, like, where's next for me, kind of planning out the next steps. And I'm currently working my first job. It's very in the beginnings for me. So trying to explore all of those areas and try to answer those questions and get more clarity sometimes can be a bit overwhelming for me. So that's something that's kind of constantly on the back of my mind.
For sure. And adding on to that, and also in terms of Jeffrey's question about plans to go back to the US, this question does pop up in my head every so often. But I mean, yeah, it's I don't know. There are things I've loved about both living in New York and also living in London. Sometimes it feels the longer I'm here, the harder it is to go back. And sometimes in terms of just like having built a life here and then just like leaving that again. But I did that when I moved here. So I go both ways. But then it's also, I always get worried about the government stuff of like, okay, so then I have to worry about taxes again. Not that we'll always have to worry about taxes. But the social networks, social net stuff is a really is always on my mind when I think about moving back to New York, where my healthcare was tied to how many plays I did in a given year through my union. That being a thought process, just adding on to other complicated things, makes it a little harder for me to want to go back. But it also, for me, if I can work here, why not stay? I guess it depends on whether I just all of a sudden stop working, then I might think about a move back to the US.
I just wanted to second that, what you were saying, Aaron, and also a little bit more granular about the taxes and finances as one of the worries. In investing, I've been an expat now working abroad for more than 10 years, and it's really complicated, and I had no idea that how hard it was going to be to like be that professional that's starting to become successful enough to think about staying long term, and not being able to take advantage of all the other things about like growing as an adult in Europe. And then another worry that is something that I don't think is ever going to go away is being so far from my family and my parents and their health. And I just started a family, and I'm definitely married a European. So I think I'm kind of here for the long haul. And it's something that is always on my mind. Like I'm always trying to make sure that I'm going to have a job that will allow me the flexibility to go home if I need to, and have enough money in the bank to get home at the last minute, or like maybe take a sabbatical if I need to, or something like that. Sorry, I can't put the video on. I'm trying to keep my baby asleep and moving around a lot.
So sweet. And yes, that's constantly on my mind, especially in these days of the pandemic, of how short notice can I just leave? Because I cobbled together a job to sustain myself, I'm quite flexible in that I can just say, hey, sorry, temp agency, I can't go anymore, and just fly back to the US. But that also means I'm not going to get paid. I'm going to have no money once I get back to the States, as soon as that runs out. So that is a thing I think about constantly, especially these days.
I guess if I could just say the idea about the question about plans to go back to the US is to have in your mind, is this a 1, 2, 3 year experience that I want, or is this a lifestyle, a life that I want to make? And as Annie pointed out, there are bigger issues related to this. Some are career related, some are family and friend related, that you're making a decision to have take a different path in life and be physically somewhere different. And again, as Aaron, as you pointed out, you know, the pandemic has really slapped me in the face about getting back to the US when it was possible. Of course, as a US citizen, you're always welcome back to the US. The question is, do you want to do that or jump through the hoops that it would take to go back under a pandemic? I didn't see my mother for 2 years during this time, and it was very difficult, you know, to not have that. Of course, there's Skype and Zooms and phone calls and everything, and that was great. But at the same time, you know, what can I say? I needed to see my mom. But I think this is something, you know, maybe if you go abroad, you're not thinking, okay, this is my life abroad now, but think it is a possibility. And then you have to think about, what's my reentry strategy? Do I want to plan a reentry strategy? Because right now, before I moved from Vienna to Copenhagen, I would ask myself, if I'd go back to the US, where would I want to live? And part of the problem was I couldn't answer that question. I couldn't see myself in the US anymore. I couldn't see a place that I wanted to live. And was very scary for me, because I thought, that's my country. Why is it so difficult to think about where am I going to live? And that was something that I just had to deal with, that it was a decision. And Aaron, I know for you, maybe New York, Chicago, LA might be, of course, that's where you go because that's where the work is. But for me as a writer, editor, it could be anywhere. Yeah.
And I think if I may add, a factor that I've been thinking about in terms of where to go next, or whether I'm staying in the UK or going back to Canada or the US, it's kind of like how I feel in those places. And sometimes I think moving to London with all of its flaws and historical legacies and day-to-day still inequalities, whatever, I feel more like I can be here without feeling like I'm out of place in London, more so than I was, for example, when I was in New York or, you know, in Ohio or something. So for me, I think when I'm looking for the next place, of course, if I go back to East Asia, it's probably the perfect place for me to be, but culturally there might still be differences and stuff. But for me, I think as a woman of color, that is always something that's on the back of my mind, like where a place that I feel like my identity can fit in without feeling like I constantly need to hide myself or shrink my space a lot of the time.
I think about that a lot too, Jodi-Ann, which is the idea of like moving to another country is like, where would I be visually most comfortable? And also like, you know, things that not even necessarily we take for granted, right, in the US, but just thinking about like queerness and like quality of life and like, you know, different countries have different, you know, rules about, you know, family formation and things like that, that we don't even necessarily think about, both in, you know, countries we think of as developed and undeveloped, right? And so that's just something that in making the choice, you know, in a way like where you were born, the default is like it's an easier choice to like not have to make one, you know. So it's just something really interesting to think about. Like, would I move to Europe instead of a place where maybe visually or aesthetically I would compromise myself less or more?
For those who have studied abroad and or done graduate school abroad, it might be interesting to talk briefly about what differences you have found from Kenyon, the American system. Yeah.
I could speak a little bit on that. I'm Grace. I'm class of 2021. I did my third year at Kenyon Exeter, which I live in London currently, but I'm actually visiting Exeter right now. So sitting in my friend's room. But I go to King's and I'm doing my master's in early modern English literature. And I found the process versus coming, obviously when I did my visa application stuff with Kenyon, that was like right before Brexit like fully happened. So the visa process was slightly different, not massively, but I found that with Kenyon, you have a lot of hand holding, which was really nice. And then when I did it the second time, I was a little bit like, oh, I'm glad I've done this at least once before. And now I'm getting ready. I actually was in a visa meeting the other day to stay here and try to figure out what I'm doing. And similar to Jodi, I think I'm going to do the graduate scheme visa. So it's been great. There's definitely like a lot of differences in going to school at Exeter, at Kenyon, or at KCL in the middle of London. That's like, it's literally in the center of the city. There's not like, the buildings are scattered in between other buildings. It's a much different experience. I live in zone 4, if any of you are familiar with London. So I don't live like in the center. So I have a bit of a commute, which is so different than going to Kenyon, because you just get up and walk out the door and then you're at class. And so that's not my experience at King's at all. If anything, I found it a little bit more difficult, well, like freeing independence wise, a bit more difficult to make friends, because it's not like you're living and eating with the same people 3 meals a day. When I tell people about Kenyon, they're always like, whoa, you did that? I'm like, yeah, and I loved it. So it's definitely a bit of a different experience, but it still like feels, because I spent a year here before, and that year happened to be right as COVID hit. So I got sent home a little bit early. It still feels like really, I'm very familiar with it. And if I hadn't had Exeter, I feel like I would have been thrown into the deep end, but I got really lucky with my professors who were here with me, and they like showed us everything. And one of them was originally from the UK. So he was very like guidance. And I was really lucky that when I was thinking about coming back, actually, while I was still here, I was like, oh, well, when I finish Kenyon, I'll come back. I did like a mentorship program with the CDO, which I don't know if Nate Weiner is still here, if you would ever be interested in something like that. But my mentor was actually from the UK and helped me a lot in figuring out the processes and all the nitty gritty stuff. I'm also really lucky to have a lot of friends and connections. We've talked a lot about connections that you make when you're on your year abroad. Like my closest friends and my boyfriend and his family and my dance friends are all here. And as much as I have friends now scattered across the globe, which is really fun to do trips and stuff, but it's just kind of fell into feeling like home. But yeah, if anyone wants more specific questions about grad school and applications, let me know. I'm sure Jodi can speak on it too, though. She's in with that.
Yeah, I guess just really quickly, I think I applied to schools in 5 different countries when I was applying to grad school. Just thought I'd throw myself out there and see what I catch. And I ended up coming to the UK, and there was one professor at Kenyon who also did his master's degree at Cambridge. So I was able to kind of connect with him. He gave me some good advice on kind of preparing for like scholarship meetings and whatnot. We study completely different things, but even not just on the day-to-day of how to navigate the difference between a much larger institutions with a collegiate system within it, and being, Cambridge with all of its legacy and complications and, elitist views and whatnot at times, how to navigate that. I think that was quite helpful. And Kenyon professors have been very helpful in terms of supporting me and getting me here, from all the reference letters and research support and whatnot. But yeah, so, and then it's very different. Like Grace said, it's a lot less hand holding. There's very little things such as like office hours or sending a draft of an essay to professor for review, or even seeing them in person every week. I also did my master's during COVID, so I think a bit of an anomaly, but still, it's interesting to get a different viewpoint academically and ideologically, and it's different. It's interesting to kind of see how different style of academia plays out, whereas, maybe you do presentations and papers more, whereas here's exams and essays and whatnot. So I feel like that part really kind of trained me academically to think more strategically, because anything I wanted to say, I have to put it down on paper within 5,000 words, and that's it. Yeah, so that's for me.
I was just going to say, and if you can't hear me very well, just let me know. But one of the ways that I was able to again, I've just been here for a month, but I knew that I swam at Kenyon, and that's where I found kind of like solitude and get through things when everything's a little easy. So, but I was able to join a team here. And so I think that that was one way that like I met people, and I'm just the American, but and Aaron's passion is obviously acting, so he's already in that, but being able to find kind of another way to like integrate myself into the community, even though it's still kind of COVID-y, was really helpful. And even just going trips to the library, like I made friends with the archivist and librarian because they're all wonderful here. I work at a girls' boarding school, and so it was just finding little things like that. Not necessarily finding more Americans, but finding things that you already know you love. And I got my master's in international studies and women's studies. And so I knew like a girls' boarding school, and I love the school environment. So if you're not really interested in like a corporate group, but I knew that was where I felt kind of like a safety net is in a school environment. So the transition has been much easier than maybe going into another kind of business culture. But I still learn so many new words a day. So it is quite funny. There's a lot of, I work with an office mate and she's across from me right now, but at least once a day, I'm going like, like we don't get each other. But it's quite funny though. So, but yeah, so that's kind of how I've been like integrating myself in just beyond the work, but everyone here at work's been lovely.
Does anyone think about the foreign service route? I'm not a pitch man or a recruiter, but I'm pretty candid about it, about the ups and downs. When you're overseas, it can look appealing, and it is a great career. But I guess I could put my name in the chat box if anyone want to email me directly or a direct question. But I'll have to peel off here in a minute.
Yeah, feel free, folks, if you would like to be reached out to or to reach out to others. If you want to drop an email or something in the chat, or I'm sure Kim and Tristan can come up with something after we've finished the Zoom as well to share details, because as we've noted many times today, it's all about who you know and creating that network in your new place.
And Aaron and I we're thinking about having a Kenyon alums London chapter or UK chapter. So stay tuned. Maybe we'll make it happen.
And Jeffrey, I know you're not the only Kenyon person in Denmark, so you can make that Denmark chapter.
Well, yeah, I mean, Annie and I, and then all those freshmen Kenyon students that were in Copenhagen, they'll eventually, 25% will come back to Copenhagen, I'm sure.
Well, from the Alumni and Parent Engagement Office, we really want to thank all of you for coming, and a huge thank you to Aaron and Jodi-Ann for helping lead this conversation, and particularly giving of their time during their vacation. But I realize as Europeans, maybe their vacation time is not as precious as ours in the States, but we hope you have a wonderful rest of your time enjoying your vacations. And to all of you, thank you so much for joining. I popped it in the chat, but we'd be happy to connect people afterwards if there's anyone who didn't get a chance to connect. And we're going to share out the recording, so you can feel free to share that with others as well. And we wish you a wonderful rest of your Monday. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.